Hello, everyone. I will now introduce you to another stalwart of the movement, Ducha. Many of you will remember the episode of the pair of shoes size 12. Chiara herself wrote, "A poor person asked us for a pair of shoes size 42. Knowing that Jesus was in the poor person, I turned to God in the Church of St. Clare with this prayer. Give me a pair of shoes, size 42, for you in that poor person." I came out and a lady came up and gave me a parcel. I opened it and it was a pair of shoes, size 42. Well, the young lady who offered them to Chiara as she was leaving the church was Ducha Caldereri, who from the earliest days foretold a reality that would come to life in the following years, that of the volunteers of God. The song we just heard, I think was an appropriate call for all of us to be volunteers of God. Ducha lived across the street from the first Focolare house and was amazed by Chiara and her companions, who always put others ahead of themselves. She became enchanted with their lives, and as they read the gospel every day and tried to put the words into practice without watering it down, she was taken up by them. Dusha found herself getting more involved. She writes, "Not one day passed without my going to them after I had finished my work in the hospital. They always welcomed me with joy, very cheerfully." But Dusha was not sure what God was calling her to. She was attracted to the radical life of the gospel, but Chiara saw in her another design of God. She asks her to play the role of the Good Samaritan in the community. Let's now hear from Ducha herself the role Chiara saw for her in the movement.
Non c'era giorno in cui, finito il mio lavoro all'ospedale, non mi recassi da loro.
Not one day passed without my going to them. After I had finished my work at the hospital, they always welcomed me with joy, very cheerfully, and then they would update me on what they had discovered in the gospel. Chiara and her companions had discovered that God is love and that He is our Father. So every word of the gospel that they read was for them the way to follow. One day, Chiara welcomed me even more joyfully. Listen, Ducha, in what we discovered today. I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Do you see? It's that as that gives us the measure. How did Jesus love us? By giving His life for us. Then I suddenly heard a voice from behind me. But I am ready, you know, to give my life for you. It was the voice of one of my new companions. And then from the side, another. I'm ready too. And you, and you, and you. We were all ready to give our life for one another. Some years later, Chiara was already in Rome, and I went to her, ready to do whatever she would advise me to do. She immediately told me, "No, your way is not that of the Focolare. Your vocation is that of the Good Samaritan. You must live in your home and bring the gospel into your environment.
As mentioned in the beginning, an important event in the 1950s was the Hungarian Revolution, or the Hungarian Uprising of 1956. The revolution was anti-Soviet and was a revolt against the government, which was controlled by the Soviet Union and had imposed policies depriving the citizens of religious and civil liberty. Pope Pius XII even issued an encyclical in October 1956 urging public prayers for peace and freedom for the people of Hungary. Atheistic communism was attempting to remove from the minds of the Hungarians the religion of their forefathers. On the 10th of November, after the Hungarian Revolution was violently suppressed, Pope Pius XII, in a radio broadcast, cried out, "God, God, God. Let this glorious name, the source of all law, justice, and freedom, ring out into our parliaments, into our streets and squares, in our homes and places of work." Chiara, hearing the radio message of the Pope, was urged immediately to write an article in the newsletter Chetanova of Jan 1957, in which she echoes this plea of the Pope when she writes, "Just as there were people who destroyed God, there is a need for true followers of Jesus in the world. Disciples who will follow him voluntarily, an army of volunteers, for love is free. We need a society that bears witness to one and only one name, God. Because God exists. God exists. Yes, God exists." Therefore, she launched an appeal for the volunteers of God. There was an enthusiastic response within the movement to this call from workers, from doctors, nurses, politicians, educators, businessmen, employees, all wanting to be these volunteers of God. From 1957 onwards, Chiara encouraged the group of people to continue their commitment to society. She said, "God will be your strength." A volunteer, Chiara said, is someone who believes in the gospel and acts accordingly. He or she wants to bring fire, knowing that the kingdom of God on earth is fire. He or she thus becomes God's instrument. And if God is at work in him or her, what will he bring about? A revolution. In the years to come, the volunteers began to grow and take shape. They started engaging themselves in renewing society through their initiation in various social projects and in their different fields of work. Once Chiara, in recalling the early days of the movement and their urge to reach out to humanity, stated, "I believe that our experience of when Jesus in our midst is multiplied, the loaves to help and solve the social problems of Trent, was an early manifestation of the vocation of the volunteers, like a first seed." Moving ahead towards 2006, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the founding of the volunteers. We had a representation from India, about 15 of us. There was Savi, who's here on the call. There is Sarina, there was Ethel, and in the presence of 11,000 volunteers from all over the world present in Budapest, this was a beautiful experience. An arena filled with people coming from different walks of life, people who wanted to bring this goal of the volunteers ahead to many people. There are a few clips which you might see while we are talking about this. And it was there that Chiara reignited our lay vocation, calling us to respond to the challenges of today, because she said, the world is in need of credible people who are builders of a new humanity in the different areas of society. She reminded us to live in the 21st century like the early Christians did, one heart and one soul, and towards a collective sanctity. She ended by telling us volunteers that there were many youth looking at us and the witness we bring to society, thus to aim at fulfilling God's plan for humanity, universal brotherhood.
Certain characteristics that distinguished Ducha, I think, bring out the reality of what it is to be a volunteer. Not only did she throw herself, heart and soul into performing all the works of mercy, but she also was a social worker and a nurse. Moreover, she helped the Italian partisans who were freedom fighters, who were then living hidden in the mountains. So in her, you could discern something to do with social commitment, with politics, something indicating that even in those early days, a new vocation was being born in the work of Mary. It was a really special vocation, and yet at the same time, one that could be lived by everybody. And then Chiara met Igino Giordani, Foco, as we call him. And as she was later to tell the volunteers, she saw in him the symbol of humanity. In May 1960, the first meeting was held for volunteers in Grotto Ferretta, in a villa named in memory of the Assumption, Maria Assunta, and the first nuclei were formed. A nucleus is a group of not more than 8 to 10 volunteers that works as a basic unit. Another very important letter is from August 15th, 1980, the Feast of the Assumption, which when Chiara gave us Mary assumed into heaven as our protector. And among other things she wrote, as Mary brought created realities into paradise, so you, the volunteers, must enter paradise, bringing the world renewed. So how do we do it? Chiara enlisted the characteristics volunteers of God should have so as to make the Christian community visible. They are to undertake to give their surplus periodically, to bring the fire of their spirituality to as many people as possible, to maintain their union with God, to be concerned for the health of all members, to know the social teachings of the church, and to keep in continual contact with one another. We, the volunteers of God in India, live the characteristics mentioned at every opportunity, whether attending Mass every day as far as possible, or participating in and presenting UPM lessons, practicing gospel values at our places of work, meeting regularly to share our thoughts and experiences, to encourage each other in our efforts to live more like the early Christian communities, and praying for each other and our families and the world at large. An incident comes to mind. One of our volunteers was very unwell. Some volunteers shared hospital duty with the family and encouraged her during her last days. We had nucleus meetings at her place and even had a Skype meeting so as to include her during her long illness. Some volunteers helped her to sort out her financial matters, as her illness was very financially draining. In our workplaces too, we try to be the leaven in the dough, as Chiara says, by reaching out to others as much as possible. During these days of lockdown, many volunteers are running errands for their aged and sick neighbors, doing their bank work, ordering medicines and groceries for them online. Thus, we try to bring to life the example shared by Chiara when she pointed to Mary visiting Elizabeth as an example and said that if the volunteers were to have a word of life, it should be this: your light must shine in the sight of men, so that seeing your good works, they may give praise to your Father in heaven.
So thank you,
and Jason, for sharing, the aspects of the life of a volunteer. No? And we as is customary and as is a tradition with the Focolare programs and the sessions, is that it's always interactive. No? And in fact, also speaking with Dhoni earlier on, we were saying that how it has been for us, no, in these last two sessions. So we thought also, particularly in of the session of today, it would be nice if you could share with us in particular, what struck you, or what particular aspect of today's session was something that you could relate to. As some of us were talking of the Mariapol, some of us talking of the experience of the early Focolarini. So if we give you the next 2 minutes, practically to share this, and maybe you can also put it down, and share it with everyone. So
if there's something that struck you in particular that you want to share, you can write it on the chat, and we're all ready to hear that. If you have a question, somebody already asked some question in between, which we tried to answer, but you can put it there. So you can take a few seconds just to think a little bit, reflect, write, and we're happy to read it out. So a few things that were said here. There was Maisie right in the beginning saying she was struck by the phrase, God will be your strength, and to be leaven in the dough. That's beautiful. Somebody else said, was struck by Chiara's phrases, which we do not know unless we listen to experiences, because I guess experiences make them come alive. Thank you for the enlightening session. Learned a lot about the Focolare. The acceptance of the movement by the church is a high point of this decade. It's a moment of study, yes. Very insightful and meaningful session was a walk down memory lane when we spoke about the Mariapolis. Someone else, our vocation as members of the Focolare is written in heaven. That's beautiful. Another, even the hardcore skeptic to the Mariapolis was converted. Yes, there's hope for all of us. Yes. Then someone else, Vinay, you are also reading?
In fact, Savi and Serena here say that wisdom goes beyond everything, and what counts is love, in the end, and the whole aspect of being a good Samaritan and bringing the gospel to the society, and so I think it was very interesting for them to understand about the 50s story, And June has mentioned here, it was very touching and an informative session when Rani says, wonderful experience shared, and especially about the early Mariapolises, And of course, the comedy show, I think we all enjoyed as well. And of course, and thank you for this wonderful moment.
Then we have Wilma and Joe saying the Focolare is truly all about love and reaching out in service to our neighbors. Another, Rose says, universal brotherhood and God is my strength always. Beautiful. And the one that Marcelo liked, and I liked it too, was we were given not a wooden or a metal crucifix, but a living crucifix.
In fact.
Very much in tune with our session of last 40s. Then Condit says, today's session brought back so many wonderful memories of 2 visits to Lopiano as a gen, and also at the family place where Ted and Nisha lived, Mariapolis, preparing and singing with the gen band. They were real experiences of unity and Jesus in the midst. Of course, Conrad, you were part of that. Then we have Chris saying, very inspiring and beautiful. I liked the song You Called Us by Name. If you like it, we can also, those who want it can ask us. We can send you a link to hear the song. The song says it all. That's true. Someone else says, Chiara's personal example of living the gospel values inspired us. Thank you, Joseph, for that. I just, keeping the question and answer session open, there was one question asked last time, which we had no time for, trying to summarize it. There was someone who asked, what are the main tenets of the Focolare the last time? So if we have to reply in a brief, we could say that the spirituality of the Focolare, also called the spirituality of unity, unfolds in 12 cardinal points, and it leads from one to another. The sequence, right from the discovery of God as love, leading to the 12th point, which is the presence of Jesus in the midst, is the way the Holy Spirit revealed it to Chiara through her experiences and circumstances. The charism that Chiara received led her to penetrate to the core of the gospel, to the very purpose for which Jesus came on earth, to make us one, unity. And it is from this lens of unity that she understands and rereads the entire gospel. So these 12 points, in particular, we could say that the pillars are the goal, unity, and the way to reach it. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's like once she gave the example of a coin, so which has 2 faces. On one side, the goal, that all may be one. On the other side, the way to reach it, Jesus forsaken. And in between is the entire gospel that helps us to reach unity through Jesus forsaken. And in a very specific way, the focus is on reciprocal love, which enables us to merit the presence of Jesus in the midst and to experience unity among us and with God. So that's in a nutshell. If there are other questions that you'd like to ask us, you can put it on the chat. If we can, we'll answer now or the next time. Another thing that came to my mind was when we were listening to, or we were introducing you to Father Foresi or Chiaretto, and we said that he took on the responsibility of the co-president of the movement. It's one detail just to mention that in our statutes, the co-president will always be Focolarino priest. Who knows who's the current co-president of the movement? We can open the mics maybe.
Jesus.
Okay, yes. So Jesus is the current. Jesus Moran is also Focolarino priest.
So also today, Dhoni, and to everyone, we all know today, since we're speaking of Father Foresi, today is the day of the Vianney Sunday, which is celebrated for all the priests all over the world. And I had gone earlier in the day also to greet the priests in my parish, since there's a lockdown, and many of them were missing the chance to be there, And it was very interesting, because my parish priest said, he knows a little bit about my association with the movement, and he was saying that, you have a wonderful vocation, as lay people, and also being the royal priesthood, of the church. So I think there was something that also I could resonate with as the movement, and also when Chiara chose her own vocation, not as a religious or a married person, but as a person who would dedicate her life completely to God. So just an observation that I thought.
All right. There's a question here directed to Nisha and Ted. If you're still there, how did Nisha and Ted's parents respond to their decision to leave their jobs and begin afresh in Italy with young kids?
In fact.
Nice question. No, I think our folks are very confused. But I mean, they could not understand why we went there. They could not understand what we went there for. And
still they cannot understand why we went.
Yeah. But they didn't tell us not to go. You know, they allowed us to go ahead with our decision. I think they spent a lot of the time that we were in Italy. They visited the Focolare a lot. So they asked, I think they worried Marina a lot, and maybe the other Pope as well. You know, asking, but what are they doing? What exactly is it? So they enjoyed the photographs. They enjoyed the updates. But well, and it wasn't even a begin afresh. No, we had to come back and pick up our lives once again.
Thank you. Thanks, Ted and Nisha.